Hi, and welcome to GrassRoots Television. I'm Brent Gardner-Smith, the editor and executive director of Aspen Journalism. And this spring, I'm also the host of ProbeLine, an hour-long show here on GrassRoots Television, underwritten by the Thrift Shop of Aspen, in which we'll be talking with each of the candidates for Aspen City Council and for Mayor of Aspen. We get to spend an hour with each of the candidates. Talking with Maurice Emmer this hour. Maurice is 65. He was born in Oklahoma. He has a BS in economics from Wharton at the University of Pennsylvania. He has a JD from the University of Chicago Law School. He's a registered Republican. He lives off of Cemetery Lane. He's owned a home in Aspen for 16 years, lived in Aspen for 3 years full-time. He is married. Professionally, he's a former international tax attorney with Deloitte and also with Baker & McKenzie. He's also a CPA, and his professional career was spent in the Bay Area. And Maurice is running for mayor. Welcome, Maurice.
Thank you, Brent. It's nice to be here.
Tell me why you want to be mayor of Aspen.
Well, I think Aspen, it's a great place. It's actually the most perfect place in the world. And everybody who lives here because he or she believes that. But there will be a new mayor, and there will be some new city council members. So it's an opportunity to think about what might be a little better in Aspen. And since I've been living here full time, I've had the opportunity to observe some things in the city government that I think could be better for the citizens. And I decided, since people have asked me, why don't you not just write about it, why don't you just try to do something about it, that I would throw my hat in the ring and see whether I can.
You've been writing letters to the editor quite a bit.
Oh, yeah.
Thoughtful,
can't hold back.
detailed lettose.
Well, thank you for saying they're thoughtful. I know they're detailed.
Tell me what have they mostly been about? What issues have spurred your interest the most?
Well, the thing that sort of really gets me motivated, and probably the principal thing that motivated me to run for mayor, is being a lawyer. I've spent a career looking at problems and just developing the habit of, well, if there's a problem, let's start by seeing, is there a rule about the problem? Is there a law? Does somebody already think about it? And that provides us a baseline. And then we can examine that and think, okay, well, is that not working? And if it isn't working, then what might be better? And I just observed, as I watched what was going on in city government, that I thought it was being run too seat of the pants, that the rules were not always, they were not the first reference point, if they were any reference point at all. And my background is, well, that's the beginning reference point.
And with the city, that's the city charter.
Well, it's the city charter, but also ordinances, the municipal code, and even recently, there's an issue going on right now in the city election commission, for which there may or may not be rules, and it's a foreseeable issue for which there ought to be rules. So it's just an example. I mean, we shouldn't live our lives by rules, but it really helps if everybody can look and say, oh, well, here's what's supposed to happen. So can we all just do it that way and see where we come out?
Okay. So one issue I know some of the letters have been about, certainly you were very involved with the hydro project, proposed hydro project.
Yes, I was.
You're an opponent of that.
I was an opponent, yes.
And what was the primary basis for your opposition?
Well, I started thinking about the financial aspects. I asked questions of the city, and I got information. They were always very forthcoming with information, always been very cooperative that way. But I would look at information data, and then I would see the explanations given, and they didn't always match up. So I began to wonder, well, is anybody really even looking at the data, or is there some kind of urban legend that's developed here about what this would mean? That's how I got interested. But then I met other opponents who were opposed on environmental grounds, and I learned about the environmental issues, and I became just as concerned about those.
What do you think should happen now with hydro? What would you do if you were elected mayor about that project?
Well, the people have spoken on it, I think. The people have said the city shouldn't move ahead with it. So for the foreseeable future, I don't see any sense.
The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is still reviewing the city's application. That's still ongoing. Should that be pulled?
Well, yeah, because it's just costing money. The city's paying special counsel, outside counsel, to represent the city and all of that. And I have no idea what other internal costs are being incurred in the city to keep the project alive. But we ought to be focusing, I think, on other ways to achieve the goals of the Canary Initiative. That's just not a wise one.
So you would spike that project?
I would spike it, yeah, I would.
Okay, the city also recently entered into a contract to buy hydro from a reservoir in Ridgeway near Telluride. Was that a good decision by the city?
I think it was. All hydro is not the same. Hydro in a dam is very different from trying to derive hydro from a mountain stream, because a mountain stream has a whole ecosystem that's affected, whereas the dam is the dam. The water's there. You're going to let it out one way or another. You might as well get some energy out of it if you can.
And that made sense economically?
Seemed to me, yeah, it seemed to me that it did.
Okay, another issue you've been involved with is the plastic bag ban, and you're part of a group that's actually challenging the city's regulations in court.
That's not how I would characterize it.
Okay.
Because I am a member of the Colorado Union of Taxpayers, and
Okay.
there are lots of members. I don't know that the membership list is public, but it's a statewide organization, and I am a member of that organization. And that organization contacted me and asked would I be willing to sign an affidavit of certain facts, because I am a resident of Aspen and I'm affected by the bag tax, and I agreed to do that. And that's my only involvement in it.
So bag tax, bag fee, is that the essence of the debate on that?
The essence, it is, because the Colorado Constitution requires any new tax to be approved by the taxpayers. And my main gripe about that was the city just skirted that whole requirement, and Council voted it in and started enforcing it, and I think there's a huge question about whether that was valid.
So they banned plastic bags and said if you want a paper bag, it's 20 cents.
Right.
And that's the fee/tax.
Right.
And you think it's a tax and should go to the voters?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
And I think if there's any reasonable question about whether it's a tax, why not put it to the voters? And that's actually the first thing that caught my attention about this seat-of-the-pants approach to government. Is I actually told City Council, I think this is probably a tax, so why don't you put it on the ballot? And really, it would be, I think, kind to characterize the response as blowing me off. Just go away.
And so the purpose of the suit is to force it to a vote primarily?
Well, they were sued by the Colorado Union of Taxpayers on grounds that it's not valid because it was not put to a vote.
Okay.
That's the essence of the suit.
Okay. You've also been involved to a certain degree on the ongoing issue about ballot transparency and whether ballots cast in a city election are open to inspection. Since that's been going on, that effort has been spearheaded by Marilyn Marks.
Right, yeah.
There's been a change in the state law, and I understand, for example, the ballots in the 2013 election will be made available to citizens.
I understand that. I have to confess I haven't read the statute,
Okay.
so I'm not familiar with the details.
Okay, but there is still a question about the 2011, I think, ballots that
I think
Maryland's
so, yes.
still fighting for.
Yeah.
And
Well, she was fighting for earlier ballots than that, I believe.
Okay,
The previous election.
the 2009.
Yeah.
Okay. So where do you stand on that?
Well,
Do you have a position on that? Do you think the
I do,
ballots
because again, I read the state statute, the Colorado Open Records Act, and to me, it clearly says any record that is open to the public. And there are exceptions. I read the exceptions, and that they didn't apply, in my view,
to the ballots?
to the ballots. So it's a very simple legal matter to me, and I think the city's wasted huge resources on that. And they have a potential liability to Maryland of over $500,000 for her legal costs, I believe.
If they lose, they have to pay her
As
that.
I said, potential, yeah, right, if they lose. Yeah.
Let me ask you about your background a little bit.
Okay,
You're
sure.
an international tax attorney.
Right.
I read your professional bio. You were a highly regarded international tax
Well,
attorney.
thank you.
You did a very good job at helping companies pay less tax, or I imagine you might phrase it as the appropriate amount of tax.
Compliance.
Compliance.
Yes.
But the whole point was to help companies pay less tax.
That's
yes?
not true.
Okay.
No, okay. Because the essence, all the work I did, with few exceptions, was for multinational companies. So
Okay.
multinational companies have a challenge. They do business in so many places. Every place they do business wants to tax them in one way or another. The systems are not the same from country to country. The result is a potential for double taxation. So companies can actually end up paying more than the U.S. corporate income tax rate, which is the highest in the world right now, simply because one country taxes it and then the remainder goes back to the U.S. The U.S. taxes it again. So the essence really of corporate international tax is trying to avoid double taxation.
But also, it's the way the bios on the professional, on the company websites read, it's also artfully phrased, but it's certainly making sure no one pays a penny more than they have to.
Well, yeah,
right?
I don't see anything wrong with that.
Right.
Yeah.
Does it shape your philosophical view on taxation, though? You're running for an organization with a $106 million budget
Yes.
that is powered by taxation.
Yes.
And so do you think that people should pay less tax in the city and the city is collecting too much? Is there an anti-tax philosophy that you bring to public office?
I don't bring an anti-tax philosophy because government has to tax to function and we need government. But I hope I bring a philosophy of scrutinizing what the tax is, what it's taxing, the effects that has on the economy, and how the money's being spent. And if we look at all those things rationally, and it's not just my opinion, you know, it's a city council with 5 people. Each one has an equal vote. Mayor has no more vote than anyone else. So it's a matter of the judgment of the 5 people as advised by citizen boards and commissions and whoever else, whatever input.
I've looked at some of your campaign material. You clearly think the budget for the city is too large.
Yes, I do.
By a lot.
Well, I think it spends what it gets. I mean, the philosophy is we can get this, so let's spend it before somebody says don't spend it. I think that's the philosophy in a lot of areas.
Should we not collect the tax, or should we not spend what we're collecting?
Oh, I don't know. You know, I can't tell you the percentage of the city revenues that come from sales tax, for example, or from RET, the real estate transfer tax, which is dedicated to certain uses. So it's not all in one bucket. I can't tell you how, you know, the proportion of that. But if you just look at the magnitude of it, and then you compare it with similar, what I would consider the most similar communities. Again, Aspen is the most perfect place in the world. I know Vail is not the most perfect place in the world, but in this
They're
year's,
trying, I understand.
yeah, it's always good to have aspirational goals. All right, and Aspen sets the standard, but.
You compared Aspen's budget to many other Colorado ski
so
towns.
Aspen's budget this year is $16,000 per resident. Every resident of this city will be committed to $16,000. It doesn't all come out of each person. Some out of
That's the spend.
That's the spend
Per capita.
Now
Okay.
Vail, $11,008 per resident, and Steamboat Springs. This is amazing, $3,800 per resident.
Does that just prove we're 3 times as good as Steamboat?
I guess it does, yeah. I mean, maybe we should double it to $32,000 per resident, and that'll make us even better. Yeah. Great idea. You should run.
Well, look, you're a registered Republican
Yeah.
and a former tax attorney, and so it seems a logical question to ask, would you like to starve the government? Is government
No.
too big? Is government the problem? Is that kind of what we're bringing to the table here?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. You're just saying, let's just give it an eagle eye. You're also a CPA. Let's just take a closer look.
I'm not afraid to read a budget. Although it is 630 pages long this year with plenty of beautiful decoration that I'm sure cost us money to have in there, whereas Vail gets by with a 77-page budget.
So it's bigger than the other towns, but is there a fundamental structural problem with the Aspen budget that you're trying to get at? What's the real point?
Let's take an example. Okay,
Right.
A good example is Burlingame 2, which is a controversial project. And the funds for building Burlingame 2 do come out of a portion of the RET, the real estate transfer tax. It's dedicated to building affordable housing.
So that sounds appropriate.
And
so
it's
far.
appropriate. Yeah,
Okay.
that's where the money has to be spent. It's
Okay.
by law. That's the only place
Okay.
it can be spent. And
Okay.
as I said,
Right.
follow the law.
All right.
But the law doesn't say you have to spend it now. And it doesn't say you have to spend it on Burlingame 2. It just says you can't spend it in another area of the city budget.
Okay.
Now, this year, the plan is to spend another $17 million on Burlingame 2, bringing the grand total of that fund for affordable housing building down to a whopping, I think it was $2,000, $4,000. I mean, almost draining it dry. And that reflects to me this philosophy of as soon as we get it, spend it, because once it's spent, it's sunk in the ground. This happened with hydro. Oh, we've spent so much we can't turn back now. So to me, that's no way to drive policy.
But on the other hand, hasn't Burlingame been on the books for quite some time and part of a rigorous long-term planning process?
Yes, it has. Yes, it
Okay.
has. Yes, it has. And so that's a conundrum, because I don't believe we should go back and be rethinking every decision. But Burlingame 2's got its own special issues, especially for the people who are now living in affordable housing.
Do you think we should build more affordable housing, or we should stop?
I don't think we should now.
Because?
Because we already have 2,800 units. If we have 2,800 units, we have only 5,500 residents in the city. If there were average 2 residents in a unit, we've already got enough affordable housing for everybody in the city to live in affordable housing. It sounds to me just like at the macro level, like maybe we've got enough. But I think there are more specific problems for those who live in affordable housing now that are presented by building more units. And I'll be happy to elaborate if you would like.
Please, yes.
Okay. So every new unit that's built creates competition for someone who's in an existing unit, especially older units, who wants to sell the unit or needs to sell the unit because of financial situation or just wants to move or needs to move.
You mean
it creates competition.
Harder to sell your unit in Centennial, say, if Burlingame is built.
Right. It would have to be. It would have to be, because you're creating more inventory in it's its own special market. It's subsidized.
Market,
yeah, it's a finite market, and if you add more inventory to it, just supply and demand, then you're going to get a lower price. The only way you're going to sell the unit that you're in is to lower your price, because there's just more demand, especially if it's a newer unit and people coming into the system go, would I like to have an old unit or a new unit? Well, you have to price down on an older unit to compete with the newer unit. And I understand that a lot of the so-called demand for units in Burlingame 2 is actually from people who are in other affordable housing units now. It's not new to the system.
They're moving up.
Yeah, moving up, right. So that's a big concern for those who live in affordable housing, and they're a big part of our community. And I never hear anybody talk about their issues, like what are we doing to them, their investments in their units, their financial security.
I haven't heard that issue either.
Okay.
Is it an issue with have you heard that from people in affordable
Yes,
housing?
I have. I mean, I didn't make it up. I didn't even think about it until people in affordable housing started talking to me about it. And of course, then it's intuitively obvious that would happen in any system like that.
Well, while we're on affordable housing, let's talk about 2 of the other perennial issues that I've been asking people about, which is the entrance to Aspen and mass transit. So first of all, let's talk about the entrance to Aspen. You live off of Cemetery Lane, so you're intimately familiar to a certain degree with the entrance. What should be done out there? Are we done? Is it fine the way it is, or should we vote to change that?
I think I've told this to one of my chairman of my campaign is Yasmin DePagter, and she was a very strong opponent of some of the straight shot plans and so forth because of the interference with open space. And before she would agree, I mean, she and I are good friends and we agree on a lot of stuff, but before she would agree to endorse me, support me, that's what she wanted to know. She wanted to know, where do you stand on that? And so I'll tell you what I told her, which is exactly where I stand on it.
All right.
And that is, even though there have been ballot measures about it and they've been voted on and people are tired sometimes of revisiting issues, I'm a strong proponent of putting issues on ballots for people to vote on. It's a small town. If you feel passionately about something, we have a referendum system here, and you can get a petition and circulate it, and assuming that you draft a valid measure that will pass muster under the Colorado Constitution, get it on there. And I think the City Council should be very liberal in that regard, that the City Council should assist people in drafting measures without a political agenda that will pass muster, can't be challenged, not look for ways to challenge the measure, but help people get measures on the ballot. And then campaign, form your issue committee, and somebody else will form an opposing, and have your campaign and have a vote. And then the people have spoken on that issue, and I think that's how that issue should be resolved.
I think we should have another vote.
I think we should have whatever vote any proponent feels would improve the situation on anything in town, virtually, including the entrance to Aspen.
Because Jeffrey Evans, a longtime advocate of what he would deem completing the entrance to Aspen, thinks that the City Council should put a ballot question on and say, do you want 4 lanes across Merle, 2 lanes dedicated to
Right.
transit. And
Right.
in some ways, that issue has never been clear. If the citizens of Aspen said yes to that right now, there's really very few impediments to making that a reality, perhaps outside of the money. So let me ask you, I heard you say we should be able to vote on it. What do you want to see happen out there? Would you vote for a 4-lane across Merle?
I haven't studied it enough, honestly. I haven't studied the merits of it enough. And my personal view on it really shouldn't drive it, because I don't think the city council ought to make decisions like that. Too many people care about it. I know we have a representative democracy here, and we all go on the council representing everybody because it's an at-large election. But the fact is, there are some issues that are just so divisive that I think you only extend the divisiveness when you have a small group, even though it's elected officials, making those decisions instead of saying, people, would you please vote on this? We really need to know.
So you really don't have a sense whether you'd like to see the existing S-curves, or you're neutral, or don't know?
No, I don't. And in fact, Jeffrey asked me, would you make this an issue in your campaign? And I said, honestly not, because it's, I have certain issues like the affordable housing and developing jobs and the city budget. Those are the reasons I'm motivated to run. I'm really not motivated by issues about the entrance to Aspen, even though I know that's Jeffrey's passion. And he said, fine, I'm just looking for a candidate who will make it his campaign. Thank you. You're not the guy. So, okay.
Another perennial issue is support of mass transit. You'll sit on, if you're elected to city council, or you'll also sit on the elected officials transportation committee, which makes spending decisions about transit money between Aspen and Snowmass, and indeed valley-wide. Pro or con mass transit? Will you spend
I'm
money
very
on
pro.
that?
No, I'm very pro.
Pro.
Very
Okay.
pro. Yeah, very pro.
All right. The other questions I've been asking each of the candidates is to get a general sense of their political leanings. It's how they voted for president, how they voted for Amendment 64. And so how did you vote for president?
Well, as I told you when we chatted before the interview, I wouldn't tell you any more than I tell my wife. She doesn't know how I voted. I don't know how she voted. We consider it a private matter. And so I will tell you that, as you said, I'm a registered Republican, so I would tend to vote for Republicans. But I won't answer the specific question, and if you'd like me to answer about marijuana, I'll tell you that as well.
Okay. I do know that you've made donations as public information
Yes.
to Romney, Tipton, and McCain.
Yes, I did.
And you're a registered Republican.
And I'm a registered Republican.
Okay.
So
How'd you vote?
people can reach their own conclusions.
People
I just
can-
don't think anybody, public office or not, should have to feel that he has to divulge for whom he votes.
Fair enough.
Okay?
How'd you vote on Amendment 64?
Again, that one I don't even remember, but I will tell you that I think we're ruining our country in many ways, trying to overregulate, well, actually criminalize drugs. I think it's a terrible mistake. We spend all this money incarcerating people, ruining lives. We could spend a fraction of that helping people from a social welfare point of view get off the drugs if they want to, whatever, and we'd dry up the money for the cartels. And I mean, it's just terrible policy, and that goes for marijuana and virtually any other recreational drug.
So you're pro-legalization.
I am pro-legalization.
And it sounds like you, City Council, may be making decisions on management decisions or regulatory decisions about recreational pot stores in Aspen.
That would be
we can handle that?
That would be expected. Yeah, that would
Okay.
be expected.
The hydro, I've been asking people how they voted. I think you've already stated you were against the project. Did you vote against it?
I did vote against it, and I'm proud to say that because I did.
I would think so.
I did organize an issue committee on it, so I'll tell you
checking
that.
for consistency
right,
there.
Yeah,
Okay. All right, let's talk about some issues that have been in front of the current City Council, which you've not had the pleasure of discussing, at least as a member of the council.
Sure.
One of them is downtown height limits. Where do you stand on that? Do you care if buildings are 28 feet high or 42 feet high?
I care about the character of the town, and we're a resort destination. So even putting aside we who live here all the time, and we live here 24/7, my wife and I live here 24/7, apart from how we feel about what we want the town to be like when we're in town, we need to think very carefully about how it's viewed by visitors, because if the visitors don't like coming, our economy will dry up. That is the lifeblood of this community. So I look at it from the standpoint of, if I were in the shoes of a visitor coming in, what would the impression be? And I don't know what that would be. I mean, maybe we ought to be polling and interviewing visitors a lot more and finding out what their impression is. I do hear people on the street, visitors saying, "Oh, isn't this a charming town? I never knew it was so charming." That's what you want. I'm an ambassador at Aspen Mountain one day a week during ski season. I hear a lot from visitors about what they like and they don't like. And a lot of visitors would just volunteer. Like last week, one volunteered to me, I've never been here and this town has everything. This town has everything. That was just, this guy was so delighted to have discovered Aspen, had been to so many other ski areas. This was kind of, well, I'm finally going to go to Aspen. Oh, wow. So I want those people to feel like, oh, this is cool. This is cool. So if you have buildings that are too high, they block the view of Ajax, they block the other vistas, that's an issue for people who are in town trying to enjoy this as a mountain town with a mining history and all the charm that is Aspen. So height limits are just part of that.
Well, and really, in a way, what's underlying height limits is a question of government regulation of the free market. And those height limits, the discussion comes down to quite a bit. How do you keep that charm and also still work with the free market development community?
Yes,
So one of the, I think, fair questions to ask any candidate in this town is, do you have the ability to say no to a persuasive developer if you think it's right for the town, or is your allegiance and enthusiasm for the free market, will that convince you that, hey, the market should do what it wants? Where do you stand on that spectrum? Can you say no?
I can tell you exactly where I stand on that spectrum.
Okay.
We have zoning laws in this town, as we should have. We shouldn't just let anybody build a 10-story building if he has the money and thinks that it would make economic sense for him, because it does have an effect as just for the visitors, let alone us. It's just not what we want to be presenting. So we create zoning laws, and our zoning laws should reflect careful study and thought by the citizen boards that help draft them and by the city council that enacts them, and then we ought to live by them unless there's a really huge problem. And this is part of the seat of the pants government problem that I pointed out early in this discussion. We have seat of the pants government when it comes to variances. We have variance shopping because, as you say, a persuasive developer with his lawyer and his architect, his engineer, his environmentalist, 6 advisors will come in and plead this case. And once you say yes, then the next 10 line up because they say, they can be had. So the way you deal with the problem, in my view, is you make sure you have a set of zoning laws that you're happy with as a community, and then live with them. And if after a while there are apparent problems with them, like any other laws, revisit them, have public discussion, proposed amendments, go through the process, and if it's concluded there should be some changes, then make the changes. But don't make them ad hoc.
But there are almost always opportunities or situations that arise, say a planned urban development, where a developer can come in and say, okay, under this particular aspect of the code, there's a lot of flexibility on both my part and the council part. And so we're now into a discussion and a negotiation. And so when in that circumstance, you think you'd lean more towards the free market or more towards government regulation?
I like to have developments that are successful economically. Look at the obvious one, the Mother Lode building.
That has not been successful,
has not been successful. Now, I don't have any better crystal ball than anybody else about what will be successful in the market. But when a developer comes in and he's putting his money or his partner's money in.
Or somebody's money.
Somebody's money in. No, but they're putting their money at risk. They're the ones at risk for the money. Now the city's at risk because it will then change some footprint in the city. So I know it's sort of a partnership. But when they're willing to put their money into a particular plan, then I'm going to listen very carefully to why that will work economically. And I'm going to be cautious about, I'm certainly not going to try to micromanage it. I'm not an architect. I've seen city council sit there and with proposals and actually on a piece of paper start redrawing what the architect and the engineer have spent weeks, if not months, designing. I think that is really nuts. So I guess the short answer is I would give great deference to the people who've studied it, who have the money at risk. And only if I felt there was a compelling city interest in requesting a change would I request a change.
Okay. One of your platforms in your campaign is about jobs.
Yes.
And how can the city of Aspen government help create jobs, and should they?
Well, many cities have economic development functions for exactly that purpose, to attract businesses to their city so that the residents can find good employment. Now, I'm going to go back to affordable housing for a second because that is one aspect of city activity and policy that has a direct effect on this. As more subsidized affordable housing is built, it makes it easier for more people to move into the market. And as that happens, the labor force expands. If there is not a growth in the available good jobs, it just drives down the compensation for all the jobs because there's more competition for each job. So that's already happening now, and it's already affected by the city's policies on affordable housing. But how can the city be more proactive in getting good jobs in here? Well, there are probably a lot of ideas, and I'd like to get any idea that anybody has, and it ought to be considered. I had a couple of ideas that I've thrown out in this campaign. One is we have lots of people in the building trades who are out of work, and in this town we're very concerned about expanding footprint, expanding square footage, and all of that. But I look around the town and I see a lot of reasonably tired existing real estate, and I wonder how much pent-up demand is there in the existing real estate in this town for renovations that wouldn't change the footprint, but it isn't happening for a variety of reasons. Maybe financing, maybe uncertainty about payback. Those are economic and financial issues. But also, gee, it's awfully expensive to start the process of getting building permits and the like. The fees are high, the process is convoluted, it takes a lot of my time just to go through the paperwork and all of that. So those are renovation projects that aren't happening, aren't they? Because if they're there, I mean, I'm just speculating. If they're there, they're not happening because of these barriers. So what would we lose if we reduce those barriers for renovations? And we would learn whether there's demand, pent-up demand. And if there were pent-up demand, we'd put a lot of people in the trades to work in very short order. So that's one idea I've had. I haven't heard anyone else talk about that. Another I've had is we're this premier ski destination, and yet Obermeyer is the only ski company, ski industry-related company, that makes products and the like, that's based here, has operations here. But wouldn't it be possible, or what shouldn't it, with a $106 million budget, couldn't we spend a little money on an economic development function and think about, is it worth reaching out to some ski manufacturers, to some boot manufacturers, to some other product companies, not to build plants here. They're not going to build plants here. It's not economic. But have their R&D centers here. Their design centers, say designed in Aspen, tested in Aspen. And that ought to be attractive to some companies to be able to say that this is where we develop it, because that's our brand. And I don't think we're leveraging it as a town the way we can. So those are two ideas that I have. They don't require any government spending except possibly on an economic development function, which would be very few people.
There's been cycles in Aspen's history where some people feel there's been too much construction and building going on, and it's kind of overwhelming.
Yes.
And for years, there was a concern about industrial tourism overtaking town, too many visitors in town. And that tends to go in cycles. When the economy drops, the city council gets more active at promoting economic development and trying to stimulate growth. There are some people who don't think the city should do that they shouldn't be proactive trying to stimulate growth. You obviously think it is a vital function and fair function of government to do that.
I've listened to people in affordable housing who are looking for jobs, they're out of work, or they have jobs that pay too little, and they're hurting. So I just think about, well, what could be done to help them and others who aren't in affordable housing who have similar issues. I do think it's an obligation that government owes to its people.
You've been a staunch critic of city government in many letters on many fronts. And it doesn't strike me that you have confidence in the city government. And so I wonder, on all the issues that you're critical about, can the city still, you have confidence it could achieve other things, that you can use government to achieve good things like jobs. I'm kind of surprised that you would think the city could do anything well.
Well, you can do one of two things, Brent. You can just throw up your hands and say there's no hope, or you can say, okay, well, why don't we try something different? I think there's a culture in City Hall of saying no. There's a culture of us versus them, them being the citizens and us being City Hall. It's not a healthy culture. Cultures can be changed, but they won't be changed without a change of leadership. So people have asked, why didn't you run for council and not mayor? Well, one reason is actually I think there's some pretty good candidates for council, and I don't think I would necessarily improve the field so much in the council race. But mayor can offer some leadership. I haven't seen a lot of leadership. Mick's had a lot of leadership. Mick is very good at that. I mean, he has ideas. I may not think they're good ideas a lot of the time, but he has ideas. He will push them. He provides leadership. There's no question about it. And I think now that we'll have a new mayor, we ought to have a mayor who will provide some leadership. I think there should be leadership in a different direction from what we've had for the last few years. And if we have leadership, then maybe we can change the culture in City Hall. And I think actually one of the things, you've probably heard it around, and most people have heard it said in one way or another, I don't feel I can speak up because they'll retaliate against me. I said that to John Worcester once, and he said, well, give me one example. Well, like I'm going to blow the whistle on somebody who said they might retaliate against me? No. It doesn't really matter whether that actually happens. It's bad enough that there's a perception that I can't speak up because I might be retaliated against. I won't get my building permit. I won't get this. If my son wants a city job and he applies for it, he'll be blacklisted. So we got to change that culture. And one thing I would propose, if I'm elected mayor, is we put together a citizens commission to study that problem and determine, is it really a problem? Is the perception out there? And if it's determined that it is, then I think we should instruct the city manager to propose a plan for expunging it from City Hall.
Do you think the city manager is part of the problem?
I don't know, because he hasn't been permitted to do his job, in my opinion. If you look at a city council meeting, and I confess I don't watch that many of them because they kind of drive me crazy, but he's always relegated to the green room over here, right? To the peanut gallery.
To the staff table.
To the staff table. Now, the city charter says that the city manager is supposed to be running the administration of the government, and it actually says no member of council, including mayor, is to issue any instructions to anyone in city government, including the city manager, except the council as council, not an individual. The council as council is to instruct the city manager. And I don't think that's what's been happening. I think there's been too much going around the city manager, relegating him here, and then when he's in front of city council, that's when they think that they can actually leverage him to push some policy they've decided they already want to push. And therefore, I don't really know what kind of job Steve would do if we said, Steve, do it according to the charter.
You want a strong city manager?
Well,
though.
no, I want according to the charter. Charter doesn't say strong city manager. Let's have an analogy here. So this is a resort town. What's a good resort? It's in a lot of places. Ritz-Carlton. Ritz-Carlton has beautiful resorts. The one at Highlands is great, but that's not one of their typical ones. Their typical ones are big, expansive, almost like little towns unto themselves.
Bachelor Gulch.
Yeah, and so each one of those has a general manager. He's like the city manager for that property, for Ritz-Carlton. Now, he doesn't just make it up. He's got an instruction book. Where did he get it? he got it from the board of Ritz Carlton. They decided, here are the policies, that's like our ordinances, our charter, and so forth. And that's his manual, and he runs the business according to that. That's what our city manager is supposed to do. I got these instructions from council. I'm running the city the way they instructed me to run it. And if city council says, we're instructing you to run it in a way that makes people feel like they're listened to and that makes people feel like they won't be retaliated against, that's in the instruction manual. And then you expect him to run all of the business of the city that way. And we're not doing it that way. We've got the board, like it's as if Ritz-Carlton board comes around and chairman of the board runs around and says, no, let's make this change in the kitchen and let's do this thing over here with the housekeeping staff. And the next thing you know, guests, that's the citizens, say, this is not what I expected. How did this happen? It's not in the rule book. When I signed up for this place, they didn't tell me they weren't going to change the beds, but once a month. Well, who made that decision? Well, it wasn't the general manager. It was. So that's.
But there's a general perception in town that sometimes our general manager, the mayor, Mick Ireland, can be a bit of a bully, and he's the one who's he's the one who's fostering that climate. Yes, that criticism is out there, isn't it?
I've heard that criticism. Mm-hmm. He's not the general manager, though. He's the chairman of the board. Mm-hmm. And just like a chairman of a board of directors, he has one vote, and the other members have a vote. And what he does is he's supposed to chair the meetings and keep it orderly and attend to the agenda and things like that. But he's not supposed to be going in and telling the building department this or the utilities department that. Now, I can't point to any documentary evidence that happens, but there is anecdotal evidence and there's, I'd say, circumstantial evidence.
Let's talk about style points then and perception.
Mm-hmm.
Style of mayor, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are people who haven't met you and haven't had the pleasure of spending time with you and
Mm-hmm.
finding out that you're actually quite charming with a great sense of humor, okay? But
I can't tell those jokes on the air, though. They're all off color.
But there are people who may know you only through your letters.
I'm sure there are many of those. Yeah.
And may think that it might be trading one person who some people think Mick could use more charm than
Yes.
he has, right? So there may be people who have read your letters and not think that you are very charming either, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
sure, of course.
how do we know we're not trading one type of mayor for a similar one?
Well, yeah, you could answer that question for yourself in your own mind because, you and I, we're not close friends, but we're friends and we know each other and we've had a number of conversations. So I'm sure you've formed your own opinion about what kind of a person is he.
You're more reasonable in person than in print.
Right, okay. and I know that in a campaign like this, I need to reach out, and I am, and I'm going out and talking to people and meeting more people so that they have an opportunity not just to meet me as a person, but also to talk about the issues and why are you running and all the things that we're talking about here. So I'm doing that, and I know I need to do that because there are people who just know me as kind of a complainer. In fact, I think it was on the Aspen Public Radio a couple of weeks ago. I think Carolyn Zachariason and someone else do a show on there about current events. And one of them mentioned that, Maurice is going to be a different kind of candidate because he's, first not on city council and hasn't been in city government at all, never been in any government, and all the reasons. And he's been, writing a lot of letters, been involved and all that. And he's got a fairly fresh look at things because he hasn't lived here his whole life. Okay. But someone said, but we know what he's against, we don't know what he's for. And I took that very much to heart. And that's why I think you've seen some of my campaign materials. I try to explain I'm for this, I'm for that. I'm for doing this for affordable housing residents. I'm for doing this for jobs. And it was a fair comment. When you're a commentator, and that's not the joke about the commentator, like your commentator. There's a joke about that. But then you tend to comment on what you think needs correcting or improvement. Bravo to the people who write letters to the paper saying congratulations to this group on doing a great job or congratulations to this person on doing a great job. Unfortunately, I can't say I've ever written a letter to a paper like that, and that's not good. But the role of the role of mayor is not a role of criticism, it's a role of leadership, as I said. So people need to understand where would he want to lead us, and is he a reasonable person we think could deal? Now, I've got a lot of people supporting me. Some are very liberal, some are very conservative, some are right down the middle, and some of them don't get along with each other very well on a personal level because it's a small town and people run into each other a lot, and sometimes the friction builds up. Okay.
In Aspen?
And so far, I've been able to keep everybody working on the campaign, happy. You know, I'm doing my function. I don't have to deal with the other person too much, etc. So these are things you have to be sensitive to. If you're going to do a job like mayor, you have to lead everybody.
It's harder than being a critic.
No, much harder than being a critic, but more fun probably.
Well, there's a whole host component to being mayor. You have to stand up and
Yeah.
say a few words. You have
Yeah.
to cut ribbons. You
Right.
have to.
That's a challenging part because I've always been short on words.
Well, how are you at public speaking?
Well, I was state debate champion in Oklahoma. So
Well, there you go. In high school?
Yeah, in high school. Yeah.
Well, that's not insignificant.
No.
So you're not uncomfortable with it?
Not at all uncomfortable. No.
And you think you'd be a good representative of Aspen?
I certainly would try to be. It's important. As I say, we're a resort town. We want people coming here. And so our face, I think, to the rest of the world needs to be a friendly face, welcoming face.
I did see you in uniform as an ambassador, as a volunteer. Is that your first year doing that?
No, I think it's my third year.
And you've been enjoying that?
Oh, yeah, it's great.
And learning a lot, as you said,
Oh,
about
yeah.
the visitors'
Oh, yeah.
perspective.
And locals, too.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, listen, let me make sure you have plenty of time to lay out what it is you do want to do as mayor. What are if there's three things you'd like to go in and do, what are they really? What do you see as the most significant thing that would occur if you were elected mayor? What's at the top of the list?
I'd like, first of all, for everyone on city council to read the charter, because the charter describes exactly what form of government we're supposed to be following in this
Our unique
in this
home
city.
rule charter.
Our unique home rule charter.
Right.
So that's number one. So as a grounding, like these are our rules, and that would lead us then to a lot of the issues about, okay, what should we be doing? What should our relationship with city manager be, and our relationship with staff, and all of that. Second thing that I would like us to do is have a complete budget review.
Outside of the normal process.
Yeah, really understand, have a long session with Don Taylor. How does this budget work? With Steve Barwick and Don Taylor, because actually the charter says it's okay to ask questions of staff, but it's never okay to give instructions to staff. But I think we ought to have sessions with Steve and
So
with
you give
Don.
instructions to the city manager.
You can give instructions. You never. City manager is the only person we're supposed to give instructions to, and then only as a council, not individually.
Right.
It's okay for any member of council to ask questions of Don or someone else. Could you tell me, or get me this document, or informational questions. But I think we ought to spend a lot of time with Don and with Steve understanding the budget. It's big, it's complicated. Where the money comes in, where it goes out, what are the interfund transfers? I mean, believe me, it's convoluted. And then the third thing I think we should do is we should sit down with Jim True, the city attorney, and we should understand all the litigation. I think the city has probably more litigation going on than it needs to. We should review it. We should get as unvarnished, as even-handed an evaluation from him as we can, without any thumb on the scales, either way. What's the city's exposure here? What's it costing the city to keep this going? And we should make some intelligent decisions about whether we should be continuing in our inventory of litigation. Right now, if you want a complete list of all the cases the city's involved in, it's not on the website.
No, but it's public information if you're intrepid enough.
Yeah, if you're intrepid enough. Mm-hmm. But I think it ought to be posted. I mean, I think it ought to be easy for citizens to go down and say, and see, these are the cases. This is what it's about. Just facts. This is what it's about. And I also think.
Let me challenge you on a point. Or ask you a follow-up. Do you think Jim True has his thumb on the scale? You think he's
No. I think there have been people on council who put their thumb on the scale.
Okay.
I think Jim and I think Steve are in difficult situations. They work for the city. They work for city council. They are the two direct reports. And they make a good living, and they're good jobs, and they don't want to lose them.
They're the two highest paid jobs.
Well, they don't want to lose them. They apparently don't want to lose them, and so it's easy to pressure them. I'd like to have this kind of an answer. What do you think? And especially in an environment where there's a culture where people think they can be retaliated against if they don't toe the party line, whatever it is. And I think we ought to, I don't know whether we've been getting unvarnished advice from Jim, whether other members on council have been getting it besides Mick. He's the only lawyer on there, and I think he's used that training and status to kind of intimidate the other members. Well, when I was in law school, this is a legal matter. Kind of these gentle hints that, I may understand this better than you do.
I get that from you a little bit.
I'm sorry.
You're certainly the smartest guy in the room right now.
Well, but I hope that I don't leave that impression. I would not want to leave that impression. I want to harness my experience and training for the benefit of the function, but not to intimidate other people. I'd be very happy to explain to any member of council my understanding of what the charter calls for, my understanding of what this ordinance says. But that's my interpretation, and
fair enough.
That's
No
what I'd like to do.
intended.
Yeah. No, I'm none taken.
But you're an attorney. You're a CPA. I mean,
Right.
you've had a wonderful professional career. It's easy for people to think, well,
Right.
maybe he's got a point, or B, maybe I'm out of my
Yeah,
league,
maybe
I guess.
he doesn't identify with me. I mean,
Right.
maybe he doesn't understand my life. Maybe.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
I know.
Okay. You've mentioned government transparency,
Yes.
which as a journalist I'm a big fan of.
Sure.
Do you think the government, City Hall, has been as transparent as it can be?
No, I do not. Here's an example. So at the beginning of virtually every city council meeting, there's something called the consent agenda. And the consent agenda is stuff that the council votes on en masse with no discussion. Now, there's been the paperwork, there's been all this stuff, but there hasn't been discussion. And nobody really knows what it is. And there should be a consent agenda because you don't want to waste time on routine things. But a lot of it's not routine. Big spending goes through there. So I think at least at the beginning of each city council meeting, the city manager should stand up, sit down, whatever, but on the record say, here's the consent agenda and let me explain briefly what the items in it are. And go on the record, everybody's watching on GrassRoots, everybody's there, can here, it's this, it authorizes an expenditure of so many $1 million on this, it does that. Then it's on the record. And then if people want to question any of it,
because the councilman always has the ability to pull an item off the consent agenda for further discussion.
Yes.
But things do get passed on consent agenda where sometimes it does appear that it's worthy of further discussion.
Now, so that's one example.
Okay.
Another example, I think, is that there's been an overuse of executive sessions. Executive sessions are tricky because the Colorado open meetings law requires all city council meetings to be open, and it's a meeting if there's a quorum. So if any three members of council get together over coffee, that's supposed to be
Public
with
meeting.
notice and
Right, unless they run into each other at a Christmas party and that's incidental.
Right. Okay. So there's a list of exceptions for that, and those are executive sessions. The problem is that once it's decided that there's going to be an executive session, then nobody knows what was discussed. So I think city council has to be really, really careful and judicious about its use of executive sessions, because there can be a suspicion that that's where they're making the real decisions. That's when they're having the discussions that they don't want on the record. Even dinner breaks at city council meetings. I wonder whether those are not unofficial executive sessions. So I think we need to be very careful and only use them when absolutely necessary. And I don't believe they've been giving adequate notice of the executive sessions. They're
supposed to give as much information as possible without compromising the intent of the executive
Yes, and I believe they
session.
give as little information as possible. And there's no specific advance time requirement for the notice. I think they make it as short as possible. And in other words, I think it's pro forma compliance with the statute instead of, this is the culture thing. Like, if you're thinking about having an open government and you look at what should we do about executive sessions, you should default on the side of minimizing them, giving more rather than less notice, all that. But if your mindset is we don't really want anybody to know, then you'll default on the side of short notice, short description, surprise, we're going into executive session, that kind of thing.
As someone who's challenged elected officials to give more full notice of executive sessions, it's a difficult thing to do because they do feel that they're working in the public interest, and if you challenge them, you're challenging their personal integrity. So it's a difficult issue.
That is a problem, and I don't think that's an appropriate way for a public official to feel.
So we have about 2 minutes left.
Okay.
Is there anything else you really want to get out there for the average person listening about why you would make a good mayor? Convince someone watching that.
Well, let's go back to your question about, well, has the city had enough lawyers as mayor recently?
You brought it up.
Yeah, okay, well, so and a little bit more about my career, because I did a lot of consulting work, planning with companies, but I also did a lot of dispute work. So lawyers think of that as sort of the two general baskets of legal work. You consult and advise, you represent in a dispute. And I've represented a lot of companies in disputes, and they're always with a tax authority, either the IRS or their equivalent in another country. And I found that the way to resolve a dispute, and every good lawyer knows this, is listen to the other side. Because if you've listened carefully to the other side, then you know how to resolve the dispute. You know where the middle ground is. And I've done that my whole career. And I think that would be a very valuable skill as mayor, because it's a listening job, I think, much more than the speaking job you mentioned.
It's a sitting and listening job,
It is
apparently.
a sitting and listening. Yeah, apparently.
Right,
yes,
yeah.
Right.
So you ready for those long council meetings?
I hope I'll make them shorter.
You're going to go out and campaign hard?
I sure am. I already am.
You want the job?
I do want the job. Yes, I do.
How can people get information about the campaign?
We have a website, www.emmer, E-M-M-E-R, number 4, mayor, 2013.org, not com, but .org. And there is a Facebook page. Just put in Emmer number 4 mayor, and you'll get my Facebook page. Very easy to find.
Well, I appreciate anyone who throws their hat in the ring and goes for it. It's not an easy gig, so good luck.
Yeah, and thank you very much for a very fair and fun interview.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Maurice. You're watching ProbeLine on GrassRoots Television. I'm Brent Gardner-Smith. I'm the editor and executive director of Aspen Journalism. ProbeLine is underwritten this spring by the Thrift Shop of Aspen. GrassRoots Television very much appreciates the support of the Thrift Shop. And thank you very much for watching GrassRoots Television.